broader than just our campus and our community in West Alabama. Okay, let me go back to this slide. So our goal really is to focus on what you can control. So most of what we, really are managing are what we call perpetual problems. The Gottman Institute studies relationships, usually marriages, but relationships of any kind. And most of the problems that we experience day to day, the reason they're so frustrating is that about 66% of those problems are perpetual problems. They're problems that are never really going to have solutions. And so we want you to focus on what you can control. And what you can control are things like your attitude and your effort. And where things matter and where you can control those things, where that overlaps, that's where you really should focus your time, your attention, your effort, your energy. Because sometimes we can control things that aren't going to matter in the grand scheme of life. But then sometimes there are really things that are important that we have no control over. And a lot of times that's what it feels like, right? We can control the mundane that really don't matter, but the things that are really important to us, we can't control. And sometimes a coping strategy is that we try to over control our day to day lives as a coping strategy for the things that feel so much out of our control but are much more important in terms of our values, our family, the things that really matter to us. And so we can notice that we're getting a little too controlling in the day to day just because we feel like we've lost that control in other more important areas of our lives. So our goal is not to change our negative thoughts or feelings. That's really not the goal. It's really not possible sometimes, but we want to control how we respond to the things that happen to us, and that is resilience. So resilience isn't a recipe. I added this slide this morning because resilience is one of my favorite things to talk about. Let's see if we can get this switched back. All right, let's go back. All right. So, focus on what you can control. Y'all, we can't always control tech glitches. We can't control if we're sick. If we could, I would not be sick today. But here's the thing, focusing on what you can control, where things matter and where they overlap with things that you can control. That's where you want to focus your time and your energy. Otherwise, you're just kind of spinning your wheels. If you get upset about every little thing, 5 years ago, if a tech glitch had happened while I was teaching, I would have had a complete moment of panic, and I thought, oh my goodness, they're going to think that I wasn't prepared and how could I have done better? And now that doesn't faze me because it's happened so many different times that I know that it's just life. And no matter how much you prepare or you plan, things are going to happen and you just have to bounce back. And that's the thing that I'm trying to tell you about focusing on what you can control. It's really your attitude and your effort. Not much else really can be controlled in this life, unfortunately. And resilience isn't a recipe. So I added the slide this morning on this because I was really thinking about, what do I want you to walk away from this webinar with, and what's important to share. There is no formula, there is no recipe, there's no pill, there's no procedure, there's no protocol, there's no prescription for how to develop resilience. I did my doctoral dissertation on resilience and mental health in nursing students, and I did a deep dive into the literature about, what is it about resilience? How do you develop it? And researchers have been studying this since the 1970s, when the term resilience was first, coined as a construct, as something we should study. And here's what is so interesting about it, and what made my dissertation so hard, is that people couldn't agree. Researchers could not agree on what resilience is, not on the definition, not on how it's, developed, not on how you can foster it. And so it made my dissertation really hard because there aren't a lot of certainties when it comes to resilience. There's this unknown factor, this X factor of why people are resilient and how they get there. And so the way that this is totally Abby Horton's view on resilience. This is not backed by any research other than what I've consumed and what I've done in my own scholarship, but it comes more from my lived experience that resilience is like building a muscle. It's increasing your resilience with time and intentionality. And if any of you have ever lifted weights, and I'm sure you've all lifted something heavy, you know that it takes work. It sometimes takes strain. It takes a lot of practice to really get good at lifting heavy things, right? And so the analogy, of muscle building and weightlifting really applies to resilience because Unfortunately, taking a webinar or taking a class or getting a certification isn't going to develop your resilience. You might add tools in your toolbox, but it's not going to actually build that resilience for you. Unfortunately, what the way that you build resilience is actually by overcoming and working through hard things. And so to want to build more resilience is inviting you to look at the challenges that you're faced with every day and figuring out how you can actually manage and cope with those better and more proactively and more effectively. So, resilience is really a mindset. It is something that you have to
Hey,
decide.
Abby,
Yes.
is there a way you can screen share? I think when we lost you earlier, um, it didn't pop back on when we got you back.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I screen shared again and it didn't, it must have lost it because I did it again. Let me go back out.
I was trying to find a good stopping point. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. No, no. That is why you're here, Miranda. You're keeping it the show running. Okay. Did it share it again? Maybe?
Yes, we got it that time. Let me see it.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. So resilience truly is a mindset, and you have to choose to be resilient. You have to focus on some core components like connection. So social connection is very important. Wellness, there's wellness practices that can help you be resilient because there is a component that's physiological. To have physiological resilience. So, for me, when I got sick yesterday, this is not saying that if you do everything right that you're gonna, never be sick because that's not true to life. But that made me realize yesterday when I woke up sick that I've had some late nights the last couple of weeks. And unfortunately, fortunately, but unfortunately, our body responds and copes and compensates for a while. And so it takes a minute for us to realize that, the things that we've done 2 weeks prior or 3 weeks prior are influencing the way that we're, showing up this week. And so I had some late nights and ate some sugary treats, which I bet some of y'all did that too on Halloween. And so extra sugar, less sunlight, staying up late to, meet some deadlines and things like that made me probably less resilient in my physical health. And then the next time an opportunistic cold came by, I got it and I woke up with it yesterday. So there's physiological resilience, and then there's emotional, mental health, social. There's all types of resilience that you can look at, but it comes down to these key components. So wellness, healthy thoughts, and then purpose and meaning making. And so you will have to make sure that you're truly connected and aligned with your purpose because if you're showing up and doing work every day or showing up in your home and you don't feel like what you're doing day in and day out, whether it's home or work or life or whatever it is, if you don't feel aligned with your values, with your purpose in life, with the things that make you feel good, that give you meaning to life, then you're going to be out of alignment with those values. And that is when we don't show up as our best self or our favorite self because we're just going through the motions. So, those are the four components that we'll really kind of talk about today and reminding ourselves that resilience is not a recipe. It's not, take two helpings of this and two helpings of that and subtract a little of this and you're going to be resilient. But it's waking up every day and deciding I'm going to be resilient today no matter what life throws at me. I really try to practice what I teach, but that doesn't mean it's easy. It just means that I have to use more tools in my toolbox, and it means that I have to be more intentional about preparing my mind for that. So, stress is the mental and physical result of a lack of tools to cope with the demands or pressures of a situation. So, a lot of times people will ask, what's the difference between stress and burnout? And a lot of times, what we think about as burnout seems to be more of a workplace phenomenon, meaning that people say you can't be burned out in other areas of life. Y'all, I am not a burnout expert, but I will tell you, I rarely find people who are burned out in their work life and they're not burned out in other areas of their life. So, what I would tell you is, I would tell you that burnout is really feeling overwhelmed in all aspects of your life. And it shows up in our work because we're usually more accountable to our workplace. It shows up in our work because usually work is less flexible than other areas of our life. But if we had the same systems and accountability in our home life or in our social life or wherever we're talking about, we would probably see the burnout there, right? But we can't quit work. Usually that's not the first go to, right? When we're having an issue, but we can quit that, volunteer opportunity. We can stop having, and I'll use church attendance or, maybe you attend mass or maybe you attend some other religious service. We can quit those things. We can stop going to yoga. We can stop meeting our friend, and those things are not always going to be so evident, but when we stop doing things in our work life, that becomes very evident because there's so much accountability built into what we do every day. And so stress and burnout are very similar. I think chronic stress that we don't attend to, that we don't address, can lead to burnout. That doesn't always lead to burnout, but I think it can. And I think burnout is more about than just being overwhelmed in our work. So, stress is the body's automatic response to any physical or mental demand. Stress is expected and it's a necessary part of our life. I meet with nursing students all the time who are stressed about one thing or the other. And the thing that I always tell them, and I tell this to my patients, I tell this to my coaching clients, is that stress is expected. There's a Spotify playlist called Totally Stress Free and Totally Stress Free 2.0. And I joke and I say that, well, totally stress free is not the goal because if you're alive, you're breathing, you're showing up every day for your life. If you're not numbing out and coping in an unhealthy way, then you're going to be stressed if you're going to be really doing what you are called to do every day. Because stress is part of life. Getting in the car and driving somewhere, even if it's somewhere fun, is probably going to be a little bit stressful because you've got to navigate traffic. So, stress is expected, it's necessary. It makes us perform better because it makes us prepare. I would be concerned if you weren't a little bit stressed every day, but that doesn't mean that we want to live in a constant state of stress and overwhelm and being on high alert or alarm. So adrenaline and cortisol are part of those hormonal stress responses that if you were in that car driving from point A to point B and you had to slam on your brakes, that flooding sensation you get when you have a near miss of hitting a car in front of you, that is the flight or fight response that's being elicited, and you get this flood of hormones. Sometimes we have a freeze response though, and the thing about the freeze response is it's the harder one to overcome. There's all of these other responses you can have, and most of them start with an F. There's like 9 to 12 stress responses. We only usually talk about two of them. But it's funny that they made the alliteration work. They made them all start with the letter F. Um, we think about fawn, FAWN, and then freeze. So those are the four most common responses. Fight or flight are the two that we always hear about. Those are the ones we learned in our psychology classes. But freeze is the hardest to overcome because you're stuck between trying to flee, trying to run away, and you're stuck between that and trying to stay and fight. So you're in this mode of you're trying to activate two parts of your nervous system, and you feel like you're having a freeze response because you're stuck. You don't know what to do. And I find that most people that I talk to are in freeze response almost every day. When you say things like, I'm overwhelmed, I don't know what to do, I feel stuck, or you're mindlessly scrolling social media, or you're visiting people in their offices because you are trying not to face your to-do list in your email inbox, that's a freeze response, and that's because you're too stressed for too long and you don't know where to start, and that can lead to overwhelm is usually not that you don't know what to do, it's that you don't know what to do next, you don't know where to get started, and that overwhelm then kind of leads to that burnout cycle. So stress can be positive, it can be negative, but you don't want to moralize stress. It's just think of it as being neutral, necessary. Moderate levels actually improve the things that we're doing, or improve our performance, improve our efficiency. And managing that stress well can actually help foster resilience because you can look back over your day and you can say, even though like for me yesterday, breaking yesterday down, I had a 4:15 wake up call. I was in clinical and I was really excited because it was my last clinical day, but I woke up with this cold. And so yesterday I can think of, I ended yesterday on a bad note because I was sick and I didn't feel great. Or I can look at yesterday as, oh, it was the last day. It was so good to see all of my friends at Alabama. I got to spend time with my students. Yes, I was sick. and didn't feel good, but I got to help so many people in their wellness screenings, and I made it through the day. Even though I didn't feel great, like I didn't quit, right? I finished the finish line, right? That's how you can reframe a day that doesn't feel as good or doesn't go as planned. And we have to do that every day. Then you develop that resilience because you say, you know, I can do hard things. I've shown up when I didn't feel good, when I didn't have it all together, when I may have had a bad day or may have had something go wrong, but I finished the race that I had for that day and I can feel proud of that. That's what builds your resilience. That's what builds your confidence. And that's what builds self trust. So, stressors can be anything from family relationships to work life balance. It can be because of illness, chronic or acute. It can be the responsibilities that you have, certainly financial concerns. We've got geopolitics at play. We've got elections coming up. There's just so many things that we could choose to be stressed about. And so this is not a comprehensive list, but these are some of the big ones that we see. But what's important about identifying our stress is that usually the things that stress us out are probably pretty unique to us. So the things that we typically would list as stressors, my list might look different than your list, that might look different than, your best friend's list. But knowing your stressors and then identifying the triggers are so important. So because this is so personal, I'm not going to ask you to put this in the chat. Later, I'll ask you to put your favorite coping mechanism. So you can put that in the chat now if you want to, and we'll come back to it. But once you identify your stressors, pick the top 3 or 5 stressors that you have. Then write down the triggers that you have for those stressors. Because once you see the trigger, it's the cue that makes you say, okay, I'm going to, probably be stressed if this thing happens. That's the trigger. You can try to avoid or limit the trigger. You can decide in advance how you're going to respond. So when I have a tech issue, this is how I'm going to respond. You can explore self-care and stress management strategies to help you cope with that stressor. But you're really looking at how do you accept it, avoid it, how do you alter it, or, how do you just decide to manage it? So acceptance, alteration, avoidance are the 3 big ways that you can decide how you're going to approach your stress response. And so once you know your stressors and once you know your triggers, then you can actually come up with a plan. And oftentimes that plan is going to be really empowering to you. So when my kids were young, I have 5 kids. I have 2 sets of twins. And when they were young, they would have just, all would be hungry at the same time, of course. And it would be, mass chaos at the Horton house, is what I would always say. And so dinner time was a very stressful time for me. And so I had to write down what are the stressors that are going on during dinner time. Well, the doorbell's ringing, the dog's barking, plates are getting dropped and broken, and food's getting spilled, and we don't have a helper for this, or the phone is ringing, or I'm getting text messages from work. And so I wrote those stressors down because dinner time was a big stressor for me. And then I wrote down the triggers. What usually happens before all of this stress? Well, usually I'm running late, or usually, something unexpected happens. And then one thing kind of sets off the next thing. And so I wrote down those triggers that were really individual to me. And then I came up with a plan to address those triggers. So now the dog will go outside or he'll go in his kennel for dinner time. And that is just a habit that we have formed. The phones go away. So everyone's tech gets put up at dinner time. We don't take a full hour usually. So for that 30 or 40 minutes, everyone's phone goes away. Our house phone gets silent so we can't hear the ringer. When we have, dinner now that the kids are older, but even when they were little, we had someone assigned as a helper to like put out the napkins or to help with the plates. And it was usually the older sibling. And so we did those kinds of things to be able to address the individual triggers. And then the most important thing is I had to decide, did I want to be a mom that was always chaotic and always stressed? Or a mom that would raise her voice, or a mom that would get upset over little things, or did I want to be a mom that just went with the flow? And I wanted to be a mom that just went with the flow because no one can really avoid all of the stressors in life. So I had to decide that that's the person I wanted to be. That was the favorite or best self. And then I had to decide that when those things all went wrong, even if everything went wrong and nothing went according to plan, how am I going to show up? So I would talk myself through and I would say, okay, Even if every plate gets broken and all the food gets burned or all the food gets dropped on the floor and everyone's calling and someone's ringing the doorbell, even in all of that, here's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to get upset. I'm going to expect that chaos happens. I'm going to know that I can handle it. I'm going to count to 10 and close my eyes. I'm going to take a break and come back if I need to, as long as everyone's safe, because my kids were really young. And then I'm gonna have a plan because I'm a person of action. This is what I'm gonna do, and this is how I'm gonna address it. And I thought through that mentally until that became my reality. And I had to revisit it a lot. That was not an overnight change, but then dinner did become more pleasant. So I give that example really detailed because I think that it helps you hopefully see how you can do that for whatever is stressing you out in life. I don't think it's super helpful when we tell people just to not be stressed. I think it is helpful when we have a conversation about what steps did you actually take to manage your stress better. A bath bomb is great. I love a bath bomb, but that is not going to quote unquote fix your life or fix your stress. Let those kinds of things be treats. Don't let those be, like I said, the self care band aid solutions that we try to make things be better. Let's change the situation as much as we can. I have a good friend who's a therapist. She's a licensed mental health counselor, and I tell her all the time, I don't want a life I need to cope from. I want a life that I love and that I enjoy. And so I encourage you all to think about it in that way, if that resonates with you. So physical health improves our we have more energy, we have more stamina when we're actually addressing our stress. We have better emotional health because our emotions stabilize. We don't get all like what we call chandeliering, right? Where chandeliering is a something we use for pain response where you have an overreaction if someone touches you or something gets bumped. And that is the sign of a dysregulated nervous system. That's the sign that you really need to take some time to really work on your physical health and your mental health together. They go hand in hand. Brene Brown talks about chandeliering in a lot of her books and talks because her spouse is a pediatric physician who studies pediatric medicine and practices, and he was talking about chandeliering responses in his patients, and she said he was talking about pain, she was thinking about mental health. And she said, well, people have a chandeliering response when things go, not according to plan in our mental health. And so, for example, if you were to go and get your favorite, coffee order and your barista got your coffee order wrong and you were to leave, if you were to have a complete meltdown about your order being wrong, then you're having a chandeliering emotional moment because, that probably shouldn't set that off. And I say should, but you wouldn't think that that's going to be something that's going to really ruin your day. You can always go back and fix it, or you can embrace the adventure and try something new. Um, but you wouldn't think that you would get overly upset or emotional or cry over a wrong coffee order. If you do, it's just a sign that there's probably something more going on, and it's probably frustration that everything feels like it's going wrong. So it's just an invitation to explore that more. So our emotions can become more positive. We can become more hopeful and happier. Sometimes we have to be more hopeful and wait for the happiness to come, and that's okay too. We sometimes have to take action before we feel motivated, and I think that that's true of happiness. I think we have to take action before happiness visits us. Happiness is an elusive thing that we can always be chasing. Ability to focus improves so we can be able to be more receptive to learn and to achieve our goals. We can build our skills and our confidence, which leads to our self trust because you have to know that your brain is always listening to you. So when you say that you're going to show up and you don't show up, or you're going to work out and you don't work out, or you're going to do this thing and you don't do it, our brain's always listening. And so it's like, well, she said she was going to work out yesterday and she didn't. She said she was going to work out the day before and she didn't. And so when she tells me she's going to work out today, I don't know that I believe that she's going to work out because she hasn't done it. So we have to build that trust with ourselves. That's the biggest thing I think you can do to lead a healthier, happier, more resilient life is build that trust by keeping your promises to yourself. And then that's when resilience is fostered. So, how well do you bounce back after challenges? I think that's a question we all have to answer for ourselves personally. And sometimes we bounce back really well from challenges, and other times we don't. Sometimes we bounce back really well from work challenges, but not from family challenges. And so, there's no one size fits all for this, but I think it's an important question to ask yourself. So, I don't want you to share this unless you want to, but think about, how well do I bounce back from challenges? How well do I bounce back at work? How well do I bounce back in my family or social life? Where does it feel like I'm not bouncing back well? Or if you do feel like you're bouncing back well, give yourself a pat on the back and say, I really overcame that thing that I was worried about. Be very specific about it. That's a good way to start a gratitude practice, is just think about that one thing that's very, very specific that you're grateful for. Gratitude really does help with resilience as well. So, resilience defined is really the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. So, it could be things like family and relationship problems, serious health problems, workplace or financial stressors. But I would say, because we have so many things going on in our lives today, I think it's more about the micro traumas, the little t traumas, it's the little s stressors. It's the culmination of all that we have going on that really is leading to the adversity that we're facing. It's not necessarily the big things anymore. It's just the way that we're living our life. And part of that is having access to people 24/7, access to news 24/7. We're getting bombarded with a lot of information that ordinarily we wouldn't be experiencing every day. But we can be right here in Alabama and we can see everything that's going on in the world. And that adds to the trauma response that we sometimes have. So we really want to focus on how we can weather adversity well, and that's going to look different for everyone. Health is more than the absence of disease. The World Health Organization, all the way back to 1947, said that a state of complete physical, mental, and social well being, not merely the absence of disease or infirmity, is their definition of health. And a state of being that people define in relation to their own values, personality, and lifestyle. So, what looks like health to me might be different for you, might be different than Miranda, might be different than Sierra. It might be different than your spouse or your partner or your best friend. So it's not just about disease and illness. It's also about, how that aligns with your values. You may want to be healthy and you may say, I want to improve my health. And you may want to run a 5K, or you may want to run a 10K or a half marathon. And your neighbor, their definition of health is that they want to live a long life so that they can be there for their kids and grandkids. Both are very, very good goals. Both are very personal to those people, and neither are wrong or right. It's just what's health for them. So I think that's important to point out. Lifestyle's impact on health, there's so many variables, but we have to really think about the mindset component, how we think, how we act, our health beliefs, how healthy we think that we can positively or negatively influence our health behaviors and our health practices. And it's definitely impacted by the internal components, our mind, our body, how they work together. But also, the practices can be influenced by external things like our family, our environment, what resources we have. So, those are those social determinants of health that we study a lot in healthcare. And then our needs drive our approach to health and wellness. So if you have someone who doesn't have access to the basics, they don't have access to, healthcare, running water, they're not in a safe place, they're not going to be able to actually focus on those things based on this theory of Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They're not going to be able to think about esteem or self-trust or self-confidence. Those would be the blue esteem needs. They're not going to be able to do that because they're worried about food and water and warmth and rest and safety and security and things like that. And so we have to realize where we are in our lives and what it is that we need, because that's going to drive our health and that's going to drive our resilience. So resilience and health have this important relationship. And I think that it's a bi-directional relationship, meaning health impacts resilience and resilience impacts health. That's just Abby's theory. That is definitely not something that is in the literature, but it's supported by the current literature. And so one affects the other. And I think we can take back our health and control of our resilience by saying that, let's build or rebuild that self trust. I think most of us really could use a lot of coaching on building that self trust. And remembering that resilience is going to come after you've overcome those challenges and those hardships, after you've weathered that adversity. And so it's not that you want to be, excited and throw a party when you have resilient, challenges and adversity or traumas. It's not saying that, but it's taking a moment after you realize, okay, I'm in a hard season or I'm in a hard moment. It's deciding that, I would not have chosen this for myself. And it can be something as simple as my little cold this week, or it can be something more major. I've had some other examples that were more major traumas for me. When I had a liver tumor earlier in the year and had surgery, that was a huge moment for me to develop a new level of resilience when I underwent that surgery and rehabilitation period. And so it's just a matter of deciding that you're going to choose to use that opportunity to actually develop the resilience to overcome. And you get to decide if you're resilient. Did you show up today? You're probably practicing resilience right now because there's a million other things that you could be doing on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving break. But you chose to show up for yourself. And so that's something that you can look back today and reflect on tonight. You showed up for yourself. That's half the battle sometimes. Resilience is nurturing that positive view of yourself and of your life. It's looking for the good, even when it doesn't feel like there's any good to look for. It's moving toward your goals, not away from it. It's moving toward your challenges, not away from them. You don't want to run. You want to stand and you want to face those. It's making connections. It's accepting that change is a part of life, right? Change is the only thing that's for sure. And it's taking decisive action because, like I said, when we have that freeze response, you've got to decide how you're going to show up for yourself and how you're going to manage that stressor. Because it's not when, you're having the stress that you want to decide that. You want to decide that in advance. You want to decide how you're going to embrace that. Or if you choose not to, you have to decide that as well. Don't leave it to chance. Don't leave it to the moment that you're in the stress response to make the decisions. You want to make those now. And the thing about decisive action is it's not a matter of if you're going to have a stressor, it's when, right? It's when the next thing is coming along. So I mentioned overwhelm earlier and how I think overwhelm is what really leads to that burnout phenomenon. So overwhelm is busy with an added dose of anxiety and stress and a deficit of support and time. Ted Ryder wrote that, and I edited it to say minus rest. So busy plus anxious plus stressed minus support, so that social connection we talked about, minus time minus rest. That was my addition. Is overwhelm because when you're tired, when you're sick, when you're not well rested, you're sleepy and you haven't eaten anything, those are the times. Those are the kind of the three times when you're tired, you're not resting, right? You're hungry, and you're sleepy, you're just not feeling good. That's when overwhelm sets in. And that's why if you take a minute and pause and you eat something and you drink something and you take a nap or you go to bed for the night and you wake up, usually the problems don't feel so insurmountable. It's because you've given your body and you what it needs. It needs some time and it needs some nourishment. So those are the things that lead to overwhelm. So how do you solve that equation? Well, we have to be less busy. We have to work on managing our stress and our anxiety. We have to reach out to our social support, right? At work, at home, in our social lives, we have to build those connections. And sometimes it's not that we have those connections, it's sometimes we have to build those connections because usually people who are high achievers are really solo. They work solo and they haven't maybe built those relationships like they need. And that can feel very lonely and isolating. And then you have to create time. So schedule time in to work on personal development, to look at your schedule, and then schedule time in for rest. And that's going to be what helps the overwhelm. So you need to know when and where to start. So leave breadcrumbs throughout your day of what you need to do next. Like don't rely on your memory to do that for you. Know what you want to do. So, what resonates with you? What's an area of life that you want to tackle some overwhelm or some stress? Take action, even if it's not perfect, even if you haven't really fully thought it through. As long as it's nothing that's, unethical or illegal or it's not going to hurt someone, and just take action. If you have a pile of papers on your desk, tackle those this afternoon. It's little things that give you those wins and make you feel successful. And then prioritize and schedule that rest, like I mentioned. What gets done is what gets scheduled. So everything needs to be scheduled in your life. And I truly mean that. Add it to your calendar. It's the best thing you can do. So developing self-trust, how you feel about your life really revolves around how you show up for it. So making sure that if you make a promise to yourself, you are as important, or I would argue more important than anyone else. And so your longest, best relationship is going to be with yourself. It's not with your spouse or even your kids or your parents or your best friend. The person who talks to you the most is you. It's your inner critic, it's that inner voice. And the longest lasting relationship you have is with yourself. And so make yourself a priority and take responsibility. You know, a lot happens to us that we can't control, like I mentioned earlier, that we have in Dr. Daniel Amen's words. He's a really well known clinical psychologist, has a lot of great books and free resources, but it's our ability to respond that gives us power. So don't give your power away by not taking responsibility for your life and for the actions that you need to take. And I've put this graphic here of how you build self-trust. And it takes work. This is not a weeks long, months long thing. It takes months to years to really develop the self-trust, but it's worth it when you do it. Some key skills: developing self awareness through journaling, through gratitude practice, through meditation, mindfulness. Developing that self awareness about what it is you need and what it is you want is so impactful in this journey. Your attention, your ability to be flexible, to stay focused, very, very important. Being able to let go of things physically and mentally, you know, just to move on from it. You know, think Elsa in Frozen. You just got to let it go and move on. Some things there's just you're never going to change, and that's okay. You've got to know what's worth fighting for and what isn't, what's worth your time and attention, right? And then accessing and sustaining positive emotion. Y'all, I'm not suggesting this notion of toxic positivity where everything is happy all the time and we're looking at life through rose colored glasses. That is not how I live my life. But it is making sure to remind yourself to think about, you know, okay, even though this is hard, where's the good? So a coaching technique that I learned that really changed my life is called positive reframing. You also can do neutral reframing, but I'm going to go through this. This is one that I created in the middle of the pandemic. You could insert anything in here. It all applies. So I want y'all to do this with me and see how you feel differently about your circumstances. So the circumstance doesn't change. I want you to notice that. The circumstances is I'm trying to work in the middle of the pandemic. My circumstance yesterday is I'm trying to supervise clinical while suffering from this cold. A little bit dramatic, but very true. My thought is, my life is so hard, y'all, and that is always my default. This is so hard. Why is this so hard? And it doesn't matter if it's a pandemic or a cold at clinical. That's my thought. That's probably something similar to what your thought is. My feeling is when I say my life is hard, I want y'all to all say, my life is so hard. Do y'all feel how overwhelmed you feel? Do you feel that in your body? How heavy that feels? And then when you feel that way, what do? You take no action, right? You feel stuck. You get in that freeze response. And then the result is what? Life is so stressful because you didn't do what you needed to do. So we're going to retrain our thought and we're going to come up with a new, more helpful thought. And sometimes this might need to be neutral because maybe you're not feeling overly positive, and that's okay. You've got to start somewhere. But you can say, I am strong. You might say, I'm capable. You might say, I've survived this. And you can say something like, I am strong and I can change things if I want. Because it's true, you can change the things that are going on in your life, maybe not the circumstances, but you can change your thoughts and your feelings and your actions. And eventually that will change the results. And I know that's easier said than done. But I'm asking you to consider that you can change your life by changing your thoughts. And so if we think this new thought, our life slowly does begin to change. Y'all, when I was going through that surgery and my wound opened back up, and I was struggling with how I was going to get back to work this summer and, you know, how this wound was going to heal because I had a 6-inch long incision and it opened up 3 weeks after surgery and I was in a lot of pain. Y'all, that was not easy. It was much harder than this cold. But I would get up and I would get ready for the day and I would take my shower and change my pajamas, and I would change the dressings on my wound. And there were some moments where I really believed, okay, I'm okay. This is going to be okay. And I would say to myself every morning, I would say, I'm getting better every day in every way. And I repeated that every day after surgery until I was able to heal and come back to work. And y'all, some days I said it confidently with my clean, fresh pajamas on, and some days I said it while I was in the shower crying my eyes out because I didn't believe it and I was in so much pain. But I chose that if I'm going to teach this kind of work, I've got to do the work. And so I did it anyway. And eventually it was true. And that mantra helped me with my mindset. So you see here, the circumstances didn't change. I'm still trying to work in the middle of the pandemic. That was all of us a few years ago, a couple of years ago. But the thought now is I'm strong and I can change things if I want. So I want you to put your kind of like the Wonder Woman pose, or the Superman pose. I want you to put your hands on your hips and do your fist and put them on your hips, and that's called a power pose. And I want you to say, I'm strong and I can change things if I want. So y'all say that with me. I'm strong, I'm capable, and I can change things if I want. Do y'all feel how hopeful and optimistic you feel when you say that and how much lighter you feel? And when you feel that way, when you get this little bit of borrowed inspiration and motivation from coming, I hope you've gotten that from coming to the class day, then you get to work, right? You're like, you know what? I can go tackle that pile of papers. I can go send that hard email. And when you get to work, the things change because you changed. You changed your attitude and you took action. So Helen Keller, an Alabama hero, I would say, heroine, said at one point, character cannot be developed in ease and quiet. And certainly she knew she had a harder life than most. Only through experience of trial and suffering can the soul be strengthened, vision cleared, ambition inspired, and success achieved. And so that is so true. You want to cultivate your calm. You want to do what you can do to plan and prepare for the unexpected and remain hopeful and optimistic. Keep up with the things that you can keep up with and acknowledge your feelings. You want to maintain your normalcy, so control what you can control. If it's important, if it's not important, let it go. Practice mindfulness, focus on your breathing. There's something called the boxed breathing method, and there's lots of different apps and different ways to focus on your breathing, but diaphragmatic breathing can be really helpful in resetting your nervous system and helping control your anxiety. So diaphragmatic breathing is one that I would recommend. Any practice of that. The Fit On app actually does some diaphragmatic breathing and meditation, and it's free. It's Fit FIT On, and you can get a lot of free resources by downloading that app. Miranda told me about it, and it's so good. I use it weekly, if not daily. And then think about when you have a challenge, how can I make this meaningful, manageable, or memorable? So it may not be fun, but some of the most fun I've ever had is when things went wrong. I just had to have the mindset, right? When you take the wrong turn on, your vacation, that can even be the worst thing that happens, or it can be an adventure, right? And we're willing to make that an adventure for kids, right? And we're like, oh, we're lost, but it's an adventure. Let's, stop at this roadside stand and, get directions and pick up something off the roadside stand. That's how we really want to approach life is, okay, well, what am I going to see today that I wasn't going to see because this thing went wrong? And then just keep trying to stay connected. That's so important. Social relationships are the most important in terms of long life and longevity and wellness. Harvard did a study that was done over a number of years, really a lifetime of adulthood years from this cohort that they followed. And the number one indicator of people who were happy and healthy and lived a long life was their social connectedness to their friends and their family. So stay in touch, send a card, send a letter. People will really love that because people don't do that anymore. Send a text message, send a Instagram DM or Facebook message. Host a dinner party, have a play date. If you have young kids, have a play date if you're an adult and you have no kids. We still want to play. We all have an inner child. Check on your neighbors, take walks, volunteer your time, volunteer with friends or neighbors or your family. Give yourself permission to put yourself and your health first. Say no, ask for help, and then carve out time for the things that feel good. We want a life that doesn't just look good, we want a life that feels good. I've included some coping strategies here, and we're going to pop the slides in the chat. So I'm not going to go through these. Just take this like a menu, use what resonates, and leave the rest. some wellness basics, which we have a whole class on. I'm a firm believer that when you feel sick, I'm an example today. When you don't feel good, nothing is going to feel good, right? You're not going to feel like being resilient. You're not going to feel like managing stress, but you can do it. Reminders not to use, other substances to numb out. We all do this with something. Sometimes it's binging football, or it's eating, sweets and carbs, or it's alcohol for some people, but we all use things to numb out. We just want to make sure that we're using positive coping strategies to manage our stress. And then this is a roadmap to resilience. So, really identifying what's important to you. It might be a mission statement that you put, it might be something that you recognize, I'm resilient because I overcame this thing. Write down an example. List some things that are important to you. You can do your gratitude journaling here, writing a positive affirmation, listing some values and how you're going to live those values out. And then I always think it's helpful to plan for when things go wrong. So writing down some roadblocks or some limiting beliefs to your success. So persistence and resilience only come from having been given the chance to work through difficult problems. So really embrace the adversity. And another is that life doesn't get easier or more forgiving. We get stronger and more resilient. And that's always my speech that I give to my nursing students, because it's so true. And we just remember that finding balance and finding your resilience, creating that resilience, fostering that resilience is going to look different for everyone. So we have a toolkit of resources, and it goes through all of your values and mission statements, some TED Talks that you might enjoy, some breathing techniques. Mel Robbins 54321. This is a centering technique for when you feel overwhelmed, maybe when you're having that stress response. Some self care on the go, some books and resources. We had a question about how to manage overwhelm and burnout. So a couple of those that I think would be good is this book called Resilience and Unraveling Faculty Burnout. Even if that question came from someone who's on staff, I absolutely think that that book would be helpful for you, because it really talks about burnout with the lens of being in higher education for faculty. But I think that so much of that applies for faculty and for staff. And then anything by Brene Brown, I think, is a great read. And then Carol Dweck's book, Mindset, is also a good one. So lots of good resources there. Here's some other things. Again, don't get overwhelmed with the list of resources. Just pick something that you feel good about and start there. Some podcasts and some TED Talks. Grit would be a good one to start with. The Power of Passion and Perseverance by Angela Lee Duckworth. She has a book as well. And then How to Become More Resilient. This is Cy Wakeman, and she actually is an HR representative and expert. And so she does a lot of good work around workplace resilience. So you might find that helpful. And then my friend Julia Madrid always likes to tell us to have something to look forward to every 2 weeks, 2 months, and 2 years. Just something big, something on the calendar that you can get excited about. I like to plan something once a month. Just it might be a coffee date with a friend, or it might be something like taking a book to read. It doesn't have to be expensive. Make it fun and free. And then just remember, joy collected over time fuels resilience. So really work on finding the things that bring you joy. So we'd love for you to follow us on social media, and we will take your questions. I would love to see what you've listed in the chat. Glad y'all think these are good resources. Good, good, good. I'm so glad. I hope this resonates with y'all. Sierra, thank you for popping the slides in the chat. Yes, take a walk around the building. Anytime I get an email or get news that may be a little upsetting to me, I always get up and move my body, because that completes the stress cycle. Our bodies are meant to move. So walking, doing some squats at your desk, anything to move your body when you get that stress response. If you can move your body as soon as possible, that's going to be the thing that completes the stress cycle, and that's going to help you get past that. The stress cycle happens within 2 to 3 minutes. And so if you're feeling triggered in your body longer than 2 to 3 minutes, it's because you're ruminating, you're thinking about what happened, not that it's still actually happening. Yeah, music is really good too. Working out, playing a podcast, gardening, playing the saxophone. I love music. I would love to be more musically inclined. So I'm a little jealous on that one. Weight training is definitely my go-to. I love to lift weights. Squatted, like weighted squatted exercises are really fun for me. I think that helps. Moving those big group muscles help you a lot. Yeah, and we're so sorry for all the tech difficulties. Right. I think I've gotten back to where we had the tech issues, so I don't think I missed anything. Let's see if we can have yes, PowerPoints, if you scroll up, it's kind of in the middle. Yes, thanks for the well wishes on the quick recovery. My reframe is that now I'm not gonna be sick for Thanksgiving, so I'm glad we got this out of the way this week, so that's my positive reframe for the day. Alright, any last things, any other questions, anything that I can cover? I know we're about to time, but y'all know I always am happy to stay on for a couple of minutes. Thank y'all for being so interactive in the chat today. Okay, yes, we will definitely look on your end and make sure that the slides are available, and we can always post them back here to the group, and so y'all can always come back into this chat and get the slides if there's an issue with that. Sounds like it's the day for tech. The tech world is wanting to be on Thanksgiving break as much as we all are. Anything else I can help with? All right. Well, thank y'all so much. We really appreciate y'all being here. I do hope y'all have a lovely Thanksgiving break, and that y'all are able to carve out time to do something for yourselves and that you're able to start taking baby steps toward resilience. And really, it's not that you have an action plan, it's just that you decide that you're going to be okay no matter what life throws at you the rest of the day, tomorrow, next week. Just tell yourself and borrow my voice if you need to. Not the croaky frog voice, but my normal voice. And just hear me say, you can do this. You've got what it takes to do this. You've got what it takes to overcome this. And eventually that voice will become your voice the more you say it. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Bye bye.